You know that annoying itch you feel on your arm or leg? The one you brush off as nothing more than dry skin or a fleeting irritation. What if I told you it could be the ticking clock of a health disaster waiting to explode? I used to think the same thing until it almost happened to me. Just last year, I met Sarah, a close friend who nearly lost her life because she ignored an itch. Yes, an itch. She thought it was stress-related or maybe some random allergy, so she shrugged it off. Weeks turned into months, and that harmless itch became unbearable, keeping her up at night. By the time she went to the doctor, they discovered something shocking: advanced liver disease. Her body had been screaming for help through that tiny symptom, but she and so many others like her had silenced the alarm. It's terrifying how often this happens. People dismiss these subtle signs, chalking them up to fatigue, stress, or just getting older. But here's the truth: your body doesn't send warnings without reason. That itch might not just be an itch. It could be your body's desperate cry for attention before something catastrophic unfolds. In this video, I'm sharing real-life stories of people who faced life-altering diagnoses because they underestimated what seemed like minor discomforts. These aren't just tales, they're wake-up calls. So ask yourself, is that persistent itch really worth ignoring? Or is it time to listen before it's too late? You know how I mentioned that your body has its own way of screaming for help? Well, Sarah's story is a chilling example of just how devastating ignoring those signals can be. At 28, Sarah was the epitome of a go-getter, working long hours at her marketing job, hitting the gym, and maintaining a vibrant social life. But everything changed one fateful evening when she noticed an annoying itch on her hands and feet. It's probably just dry skin, she thought, brushing it off as something trivial. Little did she know this seemingly harmless symptom would spiral into a nightmare she could never have imagined. At first, the itching was mild, almost unnoticeable. She chalked it up to seasonal allergies or maybe even stress from her demanding job. But weeks turned into months, and the itching grew more intense. Her once smooth skin began to flake and crack, leaving behind raw, irritated patches that refused to heal no matter what cream or lotion she tried. Sleep became a distant memory as she spent nights scratching uncontrollably, her sheets stained with blood from broken skin. Still, she convinced herself it wasn't serious. "I'll get around to seeing a doctor when things calm down," she told herself, burying the growing unease in her chest. Then came the day when Sarah woke up too weak to move. Her vision blurred, her breathing was labored, and her body felt like it was shutting down. Panicked, she called an ambulance, and by the time she reached the hospital, her condition had spiraled into a critical state. Tests revealed the unthinkable: advanced diabetes complicated by a severe bacterial infection or caused by the open wounds on her hands and feet. The doctors were blunt: "If you'd come in earlier, we could have managed this." Now it's touch and go. Sarah broke down in tears, realizing that her dismissal of the itching had nearly cost her life. But Sarah wasn't alone in her ordeal. Across town lived Mark, a 45-year-old construction worker who had been battling his own mysterious torment, a relentless nighttime itch that left him utterly exhausted. Unlike Sarah, Mark's symptoms didn't start with cracked skin, but rather an overwhelming sensation of pins and needles in his palms and soles. At first, he shrugged it off, thinking it was fatigue from long days at work. But soon the itching became unbearable, especially during the quiet hours of the night. He'd toss and turn, desperate for relief, only to wake up feeling worse than before. As weeks passed, Mark noticed other alarming changes. extreme fatigue that made climbing stairs feel like scaling mountains, dark urine despite drinking plenty of water, and a constant dryness in his mouth and eyes. His coworkers began commenting on how pale and gaunt he looked, urging him to see a doctor. But Mark, stubborn as ever, insisted he was fine. "I'm just getting older," he muttered dismissively. That denial proved catastrophic. One morning, Mark collapsed at work. Rushed to the hospital, scans showed extensive liver damage caused by biliary cirrhosis, a disease where bile ducts deteriorate, leading to toxin buildup and eventual organ failure. The diagnosis hit him like a freight train: end-stage liver disease with only months left to live unless he received a transplant. Sitting in the sterile hospital room, Mark couldn't help but think about all the nights he'd spent clawing at his skin, oblivious to the fact that his body had been screaming for help. Both Sarah and Mark share a haunting truth: they underestimated the power of their body's warnings. Their stories serve as a stark reminder that persistent itching isn't just a nuisance. It's often a red flag signaling deeper issues. For Sarah, it was diabetes. For Mark, it was a deadly liver disease. Both conditions progressed silently, masked by symptoms easy to dismiss until it was almost too late. Let me take you deeper into the story of Mark, the construction worker whose liver was failing, and connect it to another harrowing tale, one that hits closer to home for many of us. Picture this: James, a 42-year-old high-powered executive who seemingly had it all: money, success, influence. But at what cost? For months, James had been battling an inexplicable itch in his eyes. It wasn't just your average irritation. It felt like tiny needles pricking behind his eyelids every time he blinked. At first, he dismissed it as fatigue from staring at spreadsheets and emails late into the night. "It's probably just dry eyes," he told himself, reaching for over-the-counter drops. But the itching persisted, growing more intense with each passing week. James's schedule was relentless: back-to-back meetings, international flights, endless deadlines, and he couldn't afford to slow down. So when his vision began to blur slightly during presentations, or when reading documents became increasingly difficult, he pushed through. He convinced himself that it was stress, lack of sleep, or maybe even aging catching up to him. After all, successful people don't stop. They adapt. Or so he thought. But here's the thing about the human body: it doesn't negotiate. The itch in James' eyes didn't fade no matter how much rest he tried to get on weekends, which were rare, or how many eye drops he used. In fact, it worsened. By month 3, he could barely keep his eyes open without feeling excruciating discomfort. His colleagues noticed too. He squinted constantly, rubbed his temples during meetings, and occasionally excused himself to splash cold water on his face. Still, he refused to see a doctor. "There's no time," he muttered under his breath whenever someone suggested it. "I'll deal with it later." Then came the day that changed everything. During a critical board meeting, James suddenly felt dizzy. His vision went black, and before anyone could react, he collapsed onto the conference table. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, where tests revealed devastating news: acute liver failure. Toxins had built up in his bloodstream to dangerous levels, poisoning not only his liver, but also affecting his brain and nervous system, a condition known as hepatic encephalopathy. The doctors explained that his itchy eyes weren't just a random symptom. They were one of the earliest warning signs his body had sent out. Unfortunately, James ignored them until it nearly cost him his life. What makes James's story even more alarming is the statistic we rarely hear about. Only 30% of patients with liver disease catch their condition early enough to prevent irreversible damage. That means 70% discover it too late, often after complications have already set in. Imagine waking up one morning realizing that the very organ responsible for filtering toxins from your body is shutting down. And worse, you might have missed every single sign along the way because you thought it was just tired eyes or stress. Now let's connect this back to Sarah and Mark. Like Sarah, James underestimated the power of persistent symptoms, brushing off something seemingly minor until it spiraled out of control. And like Mark, James's body screamed for help through subtle signals: itchy eyes, blurred vision, constant fatigue. But he silenced those alarms with excuses and denial. Both stories highlight a chilling truth. Our bodies are smarter than we give them credit for. They communicate in whispers before they shout, but it's up to us to listen. Imagine if James had acted sooner. If, instead of dismissing his itchy eyes as a trivial inconvenience, he'd gone to a doctor and discovered the underlying issue. Early intervention could have saved his liver or at least slowed the progression of the disease. Instead, he found himself fighting for his life in an ICU bed, hooked up to machines that kept him alive while doctors scrambled to stabilize his condition. Even now, months after his recovery, James lives with the consequences of his delayed action: strict dietary restrictions, regular medication, and frequent checkups. Every morning as he looks in the mirror, he sees reminders of the toll his negligence took on his body. Here's the reality check. James isn't alone. Thousands of people experience similar symptoms: itchy eyes, fatigue, digestive issues, but dismiss them as insignificant annoyances. What if I told you that these minor problems could be your body's last-ditch effort to grab your attention before catastrophe strikes? Would you still ignore them? So what can you do differently? First, recognize that your body's signals are never arbitrary. Persistent itching, especially when accompanied by other symptoms like fatigue, dark urine, or changes in appetite, should never be ignored. Second, prioritize preventative care. Regular checkups aren't just a formality, they're a lifeline. Third, trust your instincts. If something feels off, investigate it further. Don't wait for the worst-case scenario to unfold. Remember Sarah's near-death experience with diabetes? Remember Mark's struggle with biliary cirrhosis? Now add James' story to the mix. Together, they paint a vivid picture of how easily we can overlook our body's cries for help. These aren't isolated incidents. They're warnings meant to teach us a lesson. Your health is fragile, precious, and worth protecting. Listen to your body before it's too late. Let's take a moment to reflect on the harrowing stories we've discussed so far. Sarah, who nearly lost her life to diabetes after ignoring itchy hands and feet. Mark, whose relentless eye irritation turned out to be a cry for help from his failing liver. And James, the high-powered executive whose blurred vision led him to discover acute liver failure. Now, imagine a story even more devastating. A mother, consumed by love and duty for her child, unknowingly sacrifices herself in the process. This is the heartbreaking tale of Lisa, a single mother whose persistent chest itching became the silent harbinger of an unimaginable tragedy. Lisa was only 34 when she first noticed the strange sensation, an occasional itch on her chest that seemed harmless enough. A busy woman juggling work, parenting, and household responsibilities. Lisa brushed it off as dry skin or perhaps an allergic reaction to laundry detergent. After all, how could she afford to slow down? Her 6-year-old daughter, Emma, depended on her entirely. Between school drop-offs, late-night homework sessions, and making ends meet, Lisa had no time to dwell on something as trivial as an itch. But the itch didn't go away. It grew worse, spreading across her chest and becoming unbearable at times. Still, Lisa told herself it wasn't important. "I'll see a doctor when things settle down," she promised herself. But things never did settle down. By the time she finally sought medical attention, months had passed, and the cancer had already metastasized throughout her body. The diagnosis came like a thunderclap. Inflammatory breast cancer, one of the most aggressive forms of the disease. The doctors explained that Lisa's symptoms, the persistent itching, redness, and thickened skin resembling an orange peel, were classic signs of this rare but deadly condition. But because these symptoms mimicked less serious issues like eczema or dermatitis, they were easy to dismiss. By the time Lisa realized something was truly wrong, it was too late. The cancer had invaded her lymph nodes, lungs, and bones, leaving her with few treatment options. What makes Lisa's story even more gut-wrenching is the statistic behind it. 75% of deaths from inflammatory breast cancer occur because the disease is diagnosed too late. Unlike other types of breast cancer, which often present as lumps, inflammatory breast cancer attacks the skin and lymphatic system, causing visible changes that are frequently misinterpreted. And while early detection can significantly improve survival rates, many women like Lisa mistake the warning signs for minor inconveniences until it's far too late. In those final months, Lisa spent every waking moment cherishing her daughter, knowing she wouldn't live to see Emma grow up. She wrote letters for birthdays, graduation ceremonies, and milestones she'd miss. She recorded videos sharing advice and words of encouragement, hoping her voice would guide Emma through life without her. But nothing could fill the void left by her absence. As Lisa lay in the hospital bed, weak and frail, she couldn't help but think about all the times she ignored the itch, convincing herself it wasn't urgent. If only she'd acted sooner, maybe she'd have had more time with Emma. Now let's connect Lisa's story back to Sarah, Mark, and James. Like them, Lisa underestimated the power of her body's signals, dismissing what seemed like a minor symptom until it spiraled into catastrophe. All four individuals shared a common thread. They were too busy living their lives to pause and listen to their bodies. Yet each of their stories underscores a chilling truth. Your body doesn't send warnings lightly. Every itch, every unusual sensation is a potential clue worth investigating. Imagine if Lisa had taken action earlier. What if, instead of brushing off the chest itching as dry skin, she'd gone to the doctor? Early intervention might have caught the cancer before it spread, giving her decades more with her daughter. Instead, she faced the unimaginable pain of knowing her time with Emma would be cut tragically short. Even now, as Emma grows older, she clings to the letters and videos her mother left behind, reminders of a bond cut far too soon. Here's the hard reality: Lisa isn't alone. Thousands of people experience similar symptoms: chest itching, redness, swelling, but dismiss them as insignificant annoyances. What if I told you that these minor problems could be your body's last-ditch effort to grab your attention before disaster strikes? Would you still ignore them? So what can you do differently? First, recognize that your body's signals are never arbitrary. Persistent itching, especially when accompanied by other symptoms like redness, swelling, or warmth, should never be ignored. Second, Prioritize preventative care. Regular checkups and self-exams aren't just formalities, they're lifelines. Third, trust your instincts. If something feels off, investigate it further. Don't wait for the worst case scenario to unfold.